So, hi, John Carney with Novus Consulting, VP of Technology, and I'm here with Josh Hawthorne to talk about AI.
Sounds great.
So, one of the things I wanted to start with and ask you kind of a little bit of kind of foundational things. Let's just go over some terminology, like LLM. What is an LLM and how is it being used, and how are you seeing it being used?
LLM would be a large language model being used for prediction capabilities. They can be specialized, they can be generic. I've seen them used a lot in some of the newer stuff, like an AI developer agent. It's almost like a pair programming. And so it can become a quasi-expert of computer science principles and such, although that's debatable sometimes. That's kind of the dream, is that could be your digital pair program. And so if you've written the same boilerplate code for the last 20 years, maybe 30 years, like some of us, it's one of those things that you've done it a few times. You don't necessarily provide the most value by redoing that. So by being able to trust but verify, that seems to be the big thing that we continually see over and over. Tell it what you want, let it do some stuff, give it some feedback, make sure before you commit or anything, you make sure that it's up to your own standard.
Yeah, and that's a good point. One of the things that we talk to IT leaders, CIOs, had a conversation with somebody this week. We were going through a use case for an AI assistant, and their big concern was data exfiltration, that data going back into a model and then being published out into the world. So we had to kind of talk about the different shapes of that and what that looks like. Part of my example was if you aren't providing your employees with some structure where they can do it safe and secure and inside your boundaries, they're doing it out in a public model, in a ChatGPT, in a Claude, in one of these, any of these that are kind of very open. And while they say they don't use the data, very early on, we saw Samsung specs getting put out into the market because somebody was at Samsung was using a public model just to have a normal kind of ChatGPT conversation. So we did walk through, like, what does it look like to run a model inside your own environment? I don't know what you've seen folks use and be able to kind of like secure their world.
So I've seen where people have hosted their own model and then put like a thin web UI in front of it, so they can use it internally, and they have full control over what data gets passed out publicly and such. In an enterprise setting, you've got your infrastructure team, your security team that can also put some checks and balance monitoring around that, make sure that nothing goes out. Real concern. I think that's it's definitely a path you can go, and it's probably advantageous to the market, especially in this highly regulated field. I think the thing to make sure you're aware of when you're getting into that is that you're taking on the hosting, you're taking on the maintenance, the patching, the updates, all that kind of thing, making sure that you have models available to your employees and such there as well in order to pull that off. But I think it is probably one of the safest bets. I like to think it's like putting a thin candy shell on the good candy.
Well, and some of the things that I've seen also are there are services that deploy this in your own world. And so like on the Microsoft side, in Azure, it can be a button click to where you deploy your model into a tenant and it's isolated just to you. I think a lot of people get probably a little overwhelmed with, okay, I read all these things, it's trained on a billion different variables and parameters, and it's this monstrosity, and it takes all this data center and power to do, and how am I going to run that? But we've got to walk people through the difference between what it takes to create a model and what it takes to run a model. And running the model can be much, much smaller, especially when some of these models come out with the mini version, which is even lighter weight than maybe the slightly bigger version. And so you could deploy a model inside your own secure tenant with a button click, just like you would deploy a SQL server or a Postgres database or a Lambda function. Like, it's still inside your world, but it's isolated and secured, and everything that happens with it is still your isolated bucket. I think people get too overwhelmed with the concept of this is new and it's really, really hard. And I think with what companies are saying, with what leadership is saying, is how do I get started? And so what would be that recommendation for don't necessarily swing for the fences right out of the gate, but how do we get started and start taking advantage of what is available now, and then maybe what is coming as we progress forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. My take is just going back to, I think, the core tenet that has been with these and will be going forward is that trust but verify. It's just different flavors of it as they get more complex or less complex. So it seems like that's the nature of it. Builds up, gets really complex, or singular. And I think we're still on that collapsing stage of that.
When we're talking about AI agents, and a lot of people get concerned on AI is going to replace me, or it's going to replace my team. How do you see that working in a balance between making people understand that really the value right now is an assistant model, not a replacement model? And how can leaders be thinking about, how do I just get started?
My take on that is the current state, the assistant model, which seems to be the most prevalent, is much more of a ask a question, get an answer. One way to kind of see that is the context. Like, how many questions does it keep track of? Is it able to expand beyond that with the same context? And so versus the agent, which you start getting into orchestration, agents talking to agents monitoring, using those LL to now do some really kind of cool stuff. And that's the thing that I think makes people concerned about eventually losing their job to an AI. What I would say about that is I saw at a conference, I think it was last year, this talk, and it was about full stack developers. And so, disclaimer, I've been full stack dev for almost 30 years now. And so this kind of hit close to home. And the title of the presentation, was, are full stack devs out of jobs? And the answer immediately was yes, like this is something they should be aware of. But it wasn't because they're going to put them out of a job. It's because the best devs are going to embrace that technology. They're going to leverage it. They're going to master it. They're going to take it to the next level before it was higher quality, higher testing, all of those kind of things. That is their expertise that's still driving that. And so I think that is something like your early adopters and such. It also makes me think of shadow IT, which is another concern I know a lot of customers have. You enable like a citizen business, you enable people in the business, and all of a sudden you're doing cool stuff. I'm a big fan that everyone is a developer at heart, and I think shadow IT is actually a really good one. So if you think about it, these are employees that are so passionate about getting their job done. They're willing to pick up a skill set or work with a new technology that they aren't familiar with, they don't fully understand, and they're willing to do that so that they can get their job done. And yeah, maybe they're cutting some red tape and stuff, but the intent is pure and the intent is there. And that's something that I think as people start to look at bringing these into their landscape, they need to identify, they need to call it out, and they need to embrace it kind of the same way as the devs. I think what that looks like is setting up these community practices within your organization. Who here has tried this? The people who show up at this community practices, those are your power users. Identify them, celebrate them. They're going to be great for testing. They've got ideas, I guarantee it, how things can be better. They know they might not feel like they have a voice or a place to share that, but they're obviously doing that. It makes it really
And you brought up the shadow IT, and we were in a conversation with the CIO last week, and that was brought up. He's like, we don't use that term. Like, I don't like that term. And so that kind of took us aback for a moment, but then as he explained it, it made perfect sense. And it was the right way to think about it. Where we are, especially, we have a lot of oil and gas customers. That means a lot of engineers touching a lot of things. And for folks who really want to get things done and have an expertise in their field, all the more reason to empower them. And so working with us, we're setting up a structure with this company to be able to distribute kind of that core creativity and development out into the departments in the business areas, guardrails appropriately, so that some engineer isn't just pure vibe coding an application that has keys built into the application and security injection problems and no ability to deploy, or kind of all the core pro dev things that have been beat into our heads for more than one decade. And it's, how do you maintain it? How do you reliably deploy it? How do you scale it? All of those things. So if you set up the guardrails that say, hey, yes, go do this, but this is how it's going to be deployed. This is how it's going to be scanned before deployment. This is the kind of infrastructure it's going to be deployed on. And we secure that pipeline, but let people take advantage of the GitHub Copilots or Anthropic's models, Claude's, or all of those different models to be able to feed into delivering the right product that has the business needs baked in. I thought it was just, and he phrased it so well and just has the right vision for where things are going. You could try to dig your heels in and say, no, this is the umbrella of who can do what. But we've been talking about citizen development in reporting. We've been talking about citizen development in kind of the lighter app space. But it's just getting further and further with these AI assistants. Like you said, it's a trust but verify scenario because they don't necessarily make the best code, maybe yet. But as we get in more agentic modeling forward, I think one of the things that companies who are succeeding at this and are treating it like, right now we're probably at that intern stage. These assistants are interns that that are helpful, and they are smart, but you got to make sure they're doing the right thing. And so deploying things for your employee base like Copilot 365 that is secure to your environment, but can read your documents, can help manage your email, can help create presentations. A lot of that is very rapid development. And it's the same thing as like a GitHub Copilot or any of the dev tooling. These tools as an aggregate to me seem like a big number. I've got 1,000 people in my company. I'll say an average of $30 per employee per month. $30,000 a month seems like a lot. But when you break it down to an individual employee and go, that's $30 a month for that employee, they only need to really save an hour of time to get an ROI on that. And so if you can see a knowledge worker who can have an AI assistant inside of Excel doing formulas better, I guarantee I use this and save more than 1 hour a month in creating presentations. I mean, that's a huge time suck for me. I'm an engineer by kind of logical concept. Creativity in pictures is not my flair. And so when I can take advantage of an assistant like that gets me started, and then I can fill in like some of the gaps and spot check, the value becomes very quickly, okay, I can see where this can save one employee an hour a month. And then it just grows from there. And you're giving your people the tools that they're going to go outside and use anyways. And that's where you get your data exfiltration. That's where you get people putting company documents into a chat GPT and to ask questions, to summarize, to do things like that. And so that's where you get those security gaps. It's really because you weren't thinking ahead and you weren't giving your employees the tools that they know they need and they're ready to use, and they will gain value from it. So on the dev side, and even on the engineering side especially, I mean, especially in oil and gas, we end up with a lot of engineers writing a lot of scripts, a lot of Python, a lot of data crunching, kind of on their own. I see even value in that. Where do you see the biggest benefit of something like a code AI assistant for not just your dev teams, but some of those adjacent departments?
Yeah, I think that is definitely the next step where things are starting to really open up in terms of like ones that maybe it's not just specialized teams, but it also expands beyond that. So what I think about things like site reliability engineer with a state development, that's a great combination. Each has their own specialty and concerns, and together that works. Not every company has the luxury of a site reliability engineer or a full-time one, or one that's if they're really good, they're probably a bit overworked, and everyone probably pretty popular. So I could see that, like as a developer, you get in there and you're generating ARM templates and stuff that maybe that's not your everyday kind of thing that you do, or maybe you're switching to bicep templates, cloud formations that are set. These agents can help that SRE make sure that while they're busy, you're getting the bare minimum, and then they can deploy agents that will help monitor, look for drift in the infrastructure to alert on that, or even fix it and maybe propose a pull request for the site reliability engineer to come in and again, trust and verify.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great one. And I like talking about the drift of your infrastructure as code reminded me, we were having another conversation, and some of this is to simplify kind of what the concept of these agents are. They are statistical models. They're not magic. It's not like this black box. To some extent, these neural networks, we don't 100% know exactly what's happening. And that's why the testing is so valuable. And that's why shaping and scoping down through pre-prompt engineering is very important when you're deploying them. But we need to remember at the end of the day, these are statistical models, and they're good statistical models of guessing, really guessing what it is. And so you've talked about hallucinations. That's how they hallucinate. Their job is to give an answer. So they're going to give an answer, period. You can tell it to not give an answer if it's not sure. And that goes into the statistical model, and it'll say, no, I didn't have enough information. Well, that's not true. It wanted to give you an answer, but you changed its statistical probability. And then it decided like, oh, well, the statistical model is not high enough. So I didn't kick you what looked like a right answer. I instead said, it's not high enough for me to tell you. Well, one of the things that I was working through last week was when we talk about image recognition on ticketing or maintenance of an item, it's not a yes or no answer. It's look at this AI model, AI agent, and tell me what's the likelihood that this is the case. And I think that's even more valuable, especially when we talk about the verify portion. Actually surface what that statistic is, so that you can have that human in the loop. It says, okay, it says it's 90% confident, but I can tell that this is not what we were looking for. Let's say you're trying to identify rust on a vehicle. You take pictures of the whole vehicle, and then you send it into the model and say, hey, how much rust is there? Is it problematic? And give me the likelihood of this needing kind of a breakdown. And I said vehicle, I'm thinking more like heavy machinery.
Yeah.
And so instead of just getting a yes, this has rust, or no, it doesn't, it's I'm 90% certain there's about 3% rust here, and it can identify it on the image. And then you can have a person actually like flag those. And as you go through that process, and that's that assistant side of it, as you go through that process, you can kind of narrow down when do we really need a human in the loop versus when can we just say, nope, that's good, and nobody has to look at it or spend time on it. And so that's that assistant intern kind of concept right now. Intern goes out, looks at it and goes, yeah, this one's questionable. Somebody else should really look at this. Or I look the whole thing over and I don't see anything anywhere. The likelihood is that's probably accurate. But again, I'm still talking in statistics, not guarantees. And that's where slowly handing over decision making to these agents is always a process for your particular use case. It's just a different way to think about computer programming and the business requesting an application that says, hey, I need you to do this mathematical problem that's always going to have the same answer. It's how do we offload a portion of the work, but have the model tell us when do we need to actually go look at it. So again, it's just that shift in mindset of what are we really asking of these applications versus historically, it's like, I need to enter this data and I need it to go into this database and it 100% has to work every single time. That still exists, of course, but we've got opportunities to also offload some additional kind of use cases into these applications.
Yeah. I think about silos. I know it's not just oil and gas industry specific, but that is definitely a common you get the silos between the departments. There's so much opportunity for handoffs there. And I think a lot of it comes due to, again, great employees that focus on the job. They keep their head down, trying to get that. They work with their team, they work with their department, but they always have the time to build those relationships in the next department over. And a lot of times work structures aren't set up to optimize that. And so I think one thing we'll start to see is using these agents to help break down the silos and get the agent that you put it to and kind of translate. What I mean by that would be like, so you've got some flyover information, be it from a plane every 6 months or a drone that your police operator, a drone pilot, go out there, because the road's washed out and he's piloting his drone, he's taking pictures of it back. Let the agent look for certain things like rest. Examples of in maintenance things, like your lease operator, he's busy flying the drone, so maybe if it detects that they're not confident to sign up, it proposes a list of work orders that need to be submitted for this site. You've already got all the data due to geofencing and everything else. And so the agent takes that, it puts it all together and starts queuing those up. And he's done. Gets back in his truck and leaves the site. Now his mobile app says, hey, we detected these things. Which work orders would you like to get? Still wearing his gloves because it's in December. hit the microphone and just tell it what you want. And the more he uses that, the more he trains it, the more he builds trust and builds trust with them. I think it ends up being a better solution. And then that agent can go across the whole landscape of the company. Anything it needs, if there is an outage or something, maybe it's alerting the right people ahead of time. Again, he's piloting the drone. He doesn't have time.
Yep. And I think that what you just mentioned about the operator talking to their phone while driving, I think is an absolute use case that's going to become more and more prevalent. Oil and gas always talks about windshield time. How much time are they actually driving around? One, you can't have them on a computer while they're doing that. And you want to minimize how much windshield time they have and make when they get to the site as efficient as possible. We will absolutely see scenarios. We're starting to work on some of them that are, I'm driving to the site, let me have a conversation with my well assistant about that particular site. What's its production? What should I be concerned about? What maintenance has happened in the last 2 weeks? All kind of that detail around the well. And it's like having a phone call with the back office who's looking up all this information, can regurgitate it very easily, can summarize it, and the operator can even put notes back into the system. And that all sounds great. But then a CDO or a CIO comes and says, that's awesome, how do we do that? Well, part of it is your data ready to go? We keep seeing people try to your data, this is still a data integration exercise, right? Your data governance still has to be there. Your data management has to exist. Your systems integrations all have to be there. It is not going to magically fix your data foundation. And while we talk about agents as interns today, they will improve over time. Sam Altman just last week talked about at the Snowflake conference where we are in the state of agents. And social media makes it seem like agents are everywhere and every company's using them. Even Sam Altman was like, it's deployed in pockets for particular use cases. That's it. It is very minimal from a full process orchestration. And then his follow-up statement was, that's probably 2 or 3 years away. Well, the answer is, how do you get ready for that 2 or 3 years away? And the short answer is, get your data house in order earlier than later. Because when those things drop, I mean, we talk about that these models couldn't even do math in the beginning. Well, the beginning was like 18 months ago, 24 months ago. I mean, the speed of the trajectory of improvement is astronomical. And I personally believe we're going to end up in a problem of electricity before we end up in a problem of actual capability. Getting your data house in order is going to be so important, and making sure you have integrations, your processes are understood. An intern or even a mid-level employee, if you don't have good processes, they can't step in and help. The AI assistants aren't going to be any different. If you don't have a process or you have a poor process, then it's going to be hard to understand these things. And that's where it's more about getting ready, taking advantage of the AI assistants you have capabilities for today, some of the things we've talked about. It would be 100% possible for an organization to implement a agent that could have that conversation in real time while somebody's driving to the site, if your data is all in order and you have APIs on top of that data to be able to access it, and you've got your security in order so that that person's not getting information they shouldn't have. But that foundation is the exercise. And then overlaying the agent on top of it is where the tremendous value comes from. I heard somebody put it great the other day. It's like, data doesn't add any value. Information adds value. And you've got to put that layer to actually make you turn your data into information. And then you can lay the agent on top of that to have that kind of use case value add. Not just, here's my dump of all the data we have, good luck AI. We are well away from that being possible. And even then the hallucinations would be through the roof.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, that really resonates a lot. One thing I liked about your scenario of this operator reducing the windshield time and summary, your whole example there, it hit on what AI agents do well. Everything you said there wasn't asking them to do something that's outside their expertise area. You can give an example where like police operators asking the agent if he should plug the well or not. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. So just trying to understand what the agents do well, making sure your employees know that, understanding what data they're operating off of, and exactly what you said, right? better mature your data is. I know this isn't going to be a new theme people hear, but
It's not earth-shattering.
right. But just the quality of your data is the foundation of it all. Taking your example for the geofencing, if you don't have good data on your platform, how are you going to set up geofencing? The thing is like geofencing is going to quickly become just the one's going to impact that. It's not going to be, oh, these people have. That's something you could do now is making sure that your better way to say that, GIS data. Okay. Making sure that your GIS data is going to be solid, clean, and your confidence level of it.
I think we're really ending up at a point where AI agents are ready for businesses. It has to be the right use cases now. There will be additional use cases later. And so one of the things that we've done with customers is essentially workshop that scenario. Lay everything on the table. Like, what are your outrageous desires and what are simple pain points that we think we could solve? And then you go rank those, not only on value, but possibility right this moment. It's some of those ideas, you don't throw them in the trash. You go, we're not quite there yet. And so you put that in a different category that says, we need models to get a little bit better. And I mean, you may be waiting 6 months. You may be waiting 12 months. We're not talking about 5-year roadmaps here. But some of the things we've discussed, like those are ready now. And the things you can buy off the shelf, don't think you've got to develop all this yourself. Go buy what's off the shelf, train your employees to take advantage of it. I mean, companies spend millions of dollars changing applications because it'll make it a little bit more efficient. You don't really have to change anything to make people more efficient here. I used to, and it's a little outdated now, but I used to give people the example. If you had an employee who was using a fax machine instead of sending an email, that's a performance conversation. Like you go, this is a no-brainer. You should be using email. Well, I like the fax machine. This is what I used forever. We're aging out from anybody actually doing that, but it's the example of, because we have a lot of conversations, especially in dev shops. How do we get adoption of these tools? How do I get adoption of Copilot? How do I get adoption of any of the models? And to me, it's a two-sided coin. One is you have to provide the training. You have to kind of conceptually get people to think a little bit differently as a paired programmer, as asking questions in a more conversational than how I would do a Google search versus how I'd have a conversation with somebody. That kind of training. And then over time, it becomes a performance conversation. I mean, you mentioned Canvas before and what they are. So can you share what you read on that?
Oh yeah, so one of my software engineering buddies sent me a text yesterday, and Canva is apparently now requiring basically pair programming with an agent as part of their development process. And it's just glancing through the article, it's really interesting because it sounds like leadership is all on board and everything, and maybe the internal engineers might be a little like, wait, are we sacrificing computer science principles for a vibe coding session? And I see how it can appear that way, but I do think long term, to everything you just said, that's going to be the expectation, that you use the tools you have available. And I love your scenario of it being an intern. And so I think as I was sitting here thinking that through, I was thinking, what would you ask an intern? What would you ask an intern?
Right.
It should be two questions. And so if we accept and understand that that's the level that we're at, maybe that helps provide that guidance of like what you're doing.
So to that point, it still cracks me up a little bit that I read resumes and they have listed on there like office products. Like we just take that for granted at this point.
Yeah.
But there was a time where having email on your resume, that was a differentiator. And with employees, with new hires, being able to use AI models for efficiency is going to be a differentiator. And so to your example, it's like, yeah, the internal folks may think like, well, that's not pure development. Well, when you have a mid-level or a senior developer who's also using AI, that's a differentiator.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll be candid, I've brought in plenty of very junior people and been very frustrated because I work with a lot of senior people. And so getting my head changed around, like I should expect something different out of this person than I would out of this other person. But that junior person, I still shouldn't expect that much different, but their ability to grow faster is going to be increased by the use of AI. But all of the tooling still needs to be in place, and the checks and balances need to be in place to make sure that they're not going off the rails. That still hasn't changed. And so again, this is increasing everybody's capabilities to deliver, but it doesn't change the landscape of how do we secure, maintain, reliability, scalability, all of those things and all those practices still have to exist.
I think something else that people can invest in to grow, just looking ahead in that next thing, and where things are going, would be computer science principles, actually. Does that mean everyone needs to go have a degree in computer science or master's? Hopefully not. Hopefully not. If you look at the maturity of the technology, things like orchestration, things like from the chatbot to the things like so okay, thinking of the chatbot going to the agent. Chatbot in my head is a developer who's just starting out, that they really focus on that. A really good mature developer, I feel like a lot of value to bring. Some of us might have been doing mistakes that we made ourselves. We might learn that way. But there's some areas you're like, here are the redragons. Let's not do it that way. I know that ends in pains. And so being able to use that as an accelerator, but at the same time understanding that is going to be a skill set that's going to help you with research. You've got an agent that's talking to an API, looking at an image, and sending an email. What if any one of those three things go wrong? It's just, that's the kind of thing I think a developer that's in it every day, and those edge cases and stuff like that everyone else is going to eventually start leveling up on and starting to understand that, well, it's not just it worked. That one didn't. We just wait for the email server to come back up. Right.
Yeah, and I think as everybody starts to get their head around, this is here to stay. We're not going to go back to a world where this doesn't exist. So then the question becomes, like we've talked about, how do I get started? How do I prepare? And what can I do now? And I think we've covered a good core of what that looks like, from making sure your data is ready to go, take advantage of what's already there off the shelf, and then identify those use cases that are able to be done now and maybe able to be done in the future. And that helps you kind of what your roadmap should be. And then you can start identifying, how do I get there?
It's so fascinating how all these tenets of like automation are starting to come into conversation. The tenets of development, scaling. They still apply, but they're different. Think back on automation. There was a time when I saw CI/CD pipelines going to automation, and the guy that was championing this, he walked around and he always asked just a simple question, and that was, what would it take for you to be done? And that just blew my mind. I always just thought that's exactly what you do. It's not and
Right.
Should we do it? Especially something like that. That's an area that, at the time especially, we were very sensitive about. To the point that is absolutely the norm today. And in fact, you probably don't want to do manual unless it's a very critical thing. Even then, I would say it would be the exception.
So Josh, this was a great conversation.
Yeah.
We'll do this again. Maybe we'll hit on some other topics as we kind of look forward to. We may have this conversation again in 6 months and have a completely different conversation. But that's the exciting part.
Exactly.
And taking advantage of what we can. So thank you for your time. And
Yeah, thank you.
do this again.
Yeah, pleasure.